Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're setting aside maybe the more sensational headlines about future threats, things like quantum computing breaking everything.
Yeah, we're looking at something maybe less dramatic on the surface, but actually it's a challenge that's incredibly immediate, almost existential for security.
Right. Maintaining security across, well, literally trillions of interconnected systems that are already running, all built on cryptographic foundations.
It's this reality that often gets overlooked. You know, we talk about these big future possibilities, these nation-state 0 days, and those are compelling, absolutely.
But the things keeping security architects up at night.
Often it's the sheer staggering complexity of the infrastructure we already have,
Yeah.
and the frankly agonizing difficulty of replacing even the oldest, most mundane legacy parts.
Absolutely. It's less a theoretical problem and more a logistical nightmare. So for this deep dive, our sources are, well, they're pretty foundational, but also strategic. We're digging into everything from core crypto textbooks, detailing things like, key destruction, the RSA revolution,
The basics.
all the way up to these high-level reports that analyze the huge systemic barriers involved in securing sprawling infrastructure. Things like the smart grid, for example.
Yeah, that's a great example of the scale we're talking about.
So our mission today is really to dissect the core weakness of pretty much any secure system, the key itself, and figure out why achieving what they call crypto agility.
Which is basically the ability to swap out algorithms, keys, components relatively quickly.
Why that's so incredibly hard, even without some catastrophic future threat looming.
And spoiler alert, it often seems like the technical challenge, the math, is actually dwarfed by the organizational, the human, the sheer engineering effort required.
That's what we're going to unpack. Okay, so let's start right at the beginning then. The public key revolution. Because I think to really grasp the scale of the logistical headache we face now, we have to appreciate the problem that RSA and systems like it solved, decades ago now?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually hard to imagine modern digital life, commerce, anything really, without it. Before public key cryptography came along, every secure communication relied on symmetric systems.
Meaning Alice and Bob needed to share the same secret key before they could talk securely.
Exactly. And that introduces this massive logistical problem right up front. How do you securely exchange that secret key in the first place?
Right. You'd need, couriers, secure phone lines, physical meetings.
Precisely. It made large-scale, spontaneous, secure communication basically impossible.
Right.
You couldn't just decide to securely email someone you'd never met.
And public key crypto just fundamentally flipped that key management problem on its head. The classic setup is, well, it's foundational now, isn't it?
It is. Bob generates a pair of keys. A public key, which he can shout from the rooftops, share with absolutely anyone.
Put it on his website, whatever.
Yeah, and a private key, which he guards, keeps absolutely secret. Alice then uses Bob's public key to encrypt her message.
And that encrypted message, the ciphertext, can then travel across insecure channels, the open internet, email, doesn't matter.
Right. Eve, our standard adversary, she can intercept Bob's public key, she can intercept the encrypted message. But the magic is, because these public key schemes rely on mathematical problems that are really, really hard to solve.
Like factoring huge numbers in RSA's case.
Exactly. Eve just cannot compute the private key from the public key, or decrypt the message without that private key in any sort of reasonable time frame, at least not with current classical computers.
So boom, secure communication on demand, no prior secret arrangement needed.
It changed everything.
And RSA really became the de facto standard, as the sources say, for public key encryption, partly because it was early, partly its robustness. But it's a good moment to maybe pause and realize not all public key math works exactly like that for direct encryption.
That's a really critical distinction.
Yes.
Take something like Diffie-Hellman, also a public key algorithm, foundational.
Right.
But its main job isn't encrypting the message itself. Its primary function is key agreement or key establishment.
So Alice and Bob used Diffie-Hellman to
collaboratively generate a shared secret key over that insecure channel. They never exchange the secret key directly, but they end up both knowing it.
And then they use that shared secret key for, faster symmetric encryption, like AES.
Exactly. They establish the shared secret using the clever public key math, and then they switch to a symmetric cipher for the actual bulk data encryption because symmetric ciphers are generally much faster.
Yeah.
Understanding these different roles, encryption, key agreement, digital signatures, is really vital when you're designing systems that need to be agile.
Okay, so all of this, the need for keys, the different types, it brings us right to the heart of the operational burden. Key management. This isn't just theory, this is the day-to-day reality of digital security.
It really is. If you look at the sort of formal definitions in the textbooks, key management covers basically two big interconnected things.
Okay.
First, it's the set of processes and mechanisms that support key establishment, that initial agreement or transport we just talked about.
Yeah.
But second, and this is critical for agility, it's the maintenance of ongoing keying relationships,
Which includes.
which absolutely includes the necessary unavoidable task of replacing old keys when they expire, or if they get compromised, or if algorithms need upgrading. It's the whole life cycle.
Right. And if key management is the system, then maybe the weakest link, the Achilles heel, is often right at the start, key generation.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are crystal clear on this.
Yeah.
The most brilliant, theoretically secure algorithm in the world is completely worthless if the key it uses is weak or predictable.
If the process for creating that secret random number isn't truly random or has flaws.
Then the entire system just collapses. An adversary doesn't need to bother attacking the complex math of RAA or AES. They just need to find a shortcut to the key.
How does that usually happen? Like bad random number generators.
That's a classic one. If the pseudo-random number generator, the PRNG, is predictable, then the keys are predictable. Or sometimes the generation procedure itself accidentally imposes limits on the possible keys, shrinking the pool of secrets.
And we actually have a really stark kind of historical example of this, right? From the days of DES, the data encryption standard, but the lesson is totally relevant today.
Yeah, the Norton discrete for MS-DOS case. It's a textbook example of how seemingly minor implementation errors can completely destroy security.
So DES, when properly implemented, used a 56-bit key. That meant 2 to the power of 56 possible keys, which back then was a huge number.
Astronomical for its time, yeah. Brute forcing it was considered infeasible for most attackers. However, this specific software, Norton Discrete, versions 8.0 and earlier.
What did it do wrong?
It wasn't one single massive flaw. It was a series of smaller additive programming choices in how it handled the key generation and processing.
Like what kind of choices? It seems odd that multiple flaws would stack up like that.
Well, this is how these things often happen in real-world software development. Decisions made perhaps for user convenience, or maybe compatibility, or just, an oversight. Specifically, this implementation did a few things.
Okay.
First, it limited the keys purely to ASCII characters. So instead of using all 8 bits in a byte for the key material, it only used 7 bits per byte, effectively.
Okay, so that shrinks the pool already.
Yep. Then it also forced the high-order bit of each byte to 0, another reduction. And then compounding the error during the actual DES processing, it ignored the low-order bit of each byte.
Wait, so you're using fewer bits to start with and ignoring some of the bits you're using?
Exactly. Each step seems maybe understandable in isolation, perhaps.
Yeah.
But the cumulative effect, it was devastating.
I bet.
Instead of the intended 256 key space, the result of all these little limitations stacked together was an effective key space of only 240.
Wow. 2 to the 40th. How much easier does that make it to break?
In practical terms, it made that specific implementation 10,000 times easier to break via brute force than a correct DES implementation.
10,000 times. So years, decades maybe, of cryptographic assurance built into the DES algorithm itself. Just wiped out. Not by breaking the math, but by basic programming mistakes in handling the key.
Precisely. It wasn't an algorithmic failure. It was a catastrophic failure in foundational engineering. Implementation matters. Hugely.
Okay, so if generating keys correctly is the first logistical hurdle, what about the other end of the life cycle, getting rid of them securely? Key destruction, you mentioned it gets paranoid.
Yeah, paranoid's a good word for it, especially in high security contexts. Once a key is done, maybe its operational period is over, or worse, you suspect it's been compromised, you must ensure it's gone. Completely, irreversibly erased.
And how you do that depends on where it's stored.
Absolutely. The storage medium dictates the method, and sometimes it gets quite physical.
Okay, so what if the key is stored in hardware, like in those EEPROM or PROM chips?
Right. If it's an EEPROM, it's electrically erasable, programmable, read-only memory, common in things like smart cards or firmware chips, the sources recommend overwriting the key's data location multiple times.
Why multiple times? Isn't once enough?
Not always reliably, especially with flash memory technologies. There can be data remnants or wear leveling issues. Multiple overwrites give higher assurance. But if the key is stored in older, more permanent memory types,
Like PROM, one-time programmable, or EPROM.
Yeah, those are physically harder to just wipe electronically. So the advice gets much more uh, direct. The source literally suggests the chip should be smashed into tiny bits and scattered.
Wow. Okay, so physical destruction. What about keys on, say, a regular computer hard drive?
Symbol deletion, like dragging a file to the trash, is absolutely not enough. The file system just marks the spaces available. The actual bits often remain until overwritten by new data.
So you need special software.
Yes, utilities that perform secure erasure by overwriting the actual disk sectors where the key was stored, again, multiple times with specific patterns. Or, for very high assurance, physically shredding the disk platter itself.
But you mentioned the real complexity, the deep logistical problem isn't just the physical media, it's the computer's operating system itself, memory management.
This is the hidden nightmare for key destruction. Modern operating systems are constantly juggling data. They swap programs and data chunks in and out of active RAM, writing them temporarily to swap files or paging files on the hard disk to free up memory.
Right.
So even if your application very carefully overwrites and deletes the key from its own designated memory space, the OS might have silently copied that block of memory containing the key to a swap file an hour ago or yesterday, or it might be lingering in some disk cache.
So you can't actually guarantee erasure just from within the application itself, because the OS might have scrolled copies away.
Exactly. The application doesn't have full control or visibility into everything the OS memory manager is doing. This is why truly high-security applications have to adopt that more paranoid approach mentioned.
Which involves
Writing specialized erasure tools. These tools don't just delete the key where it's supposed to be. They actively scan all potentially relevant areas of the disk, unused sectors, swap files, temporary directories, hibernation files, looking for the specific bit pattern of the key they need to destroy, and then proactively overwriting those locations.
That sounds exhausting, a continuous background process almost.
It can be, because keys, just by their nature as sequences of bits, are incredibly easy for systems to copy and cache in multiple transient places. Ensuring complete destruction is a non-trivial engineering challenge.
Okay, so we've established that managing the key itself from its potentially flawed creation to its incredibly difficult destruction is a huge logistical task. What about the algorithms that use those keys? They don't last forever either. What happens when the underlying math, or maybe just the parameters like key size, start to, well, age out?
Yeah, algorithms become obsolete. And the motivation for migrating away from an old algorithm often isn't even because someone found a brilliant mathematical break.
Like with DES again, you said it wasn't really broken cryptanalytically.
Right. After 2 decades of intense scrutiny by the world's best cryptanalysts, the most practical attack against DES remained brute force, simply trying all possible keys. The algorithm itself held up remarkably well.
So the problem was just compute power got faster.
Exactly. Moore's Law. By the late 1990s, building a machine that could brute force a 56-bit DES key in a reasonable time went from theoretical to, well, actually feasible, even economically viable for well-funded organizations. DES's key length was simply too short for the era.
And that created this massive need. We need something stronger than NES, but we can't wait, say, 10 years for a totally new standard like ADS to be designed, vetted, standardized, and implemented everywhere.
Precisely. This is where that impetus came from, to combine existing, trusted algorithms to boost security without designing something brand new from scratch. It's a strategy of hybridization.
A key lesson in crypto agility transitions, you mentioned.
Yes, and triple DES, or 3DES, is the absolute classic example of this approach.
Right, triple DES. So it basically takes the core DES algorithm, which everyone trusted because it had survived all that analysis,
2 decades of scrutiny.
and just runs the data through it 3 times.
Essentially, yes. In a specific sequence. Encrypt, decrypt, encrypt, or EDE.
Why encrypt? Why not just encrypt?
The EDE structure provides backward compatibility. If you use the same key for all 3 stages, K1, K2, K3, the middle decrypt cancels the first encrypt, and the whole operation becomes equivalent to single DES. It allowed systems to transition more smoothly. But for enhanced security, you'd use 2 or 3 distinct keys.
Giving you a much longer effective key length.
Right. Using 2 distinct keys gives you effectively 112 bits of strength, and 3 distinct keys gives 168 bits. So engineers got the best of both worlds, as the source puts it. They significantly increased the key length to thwart brute force while still leveraging all the confidence they had in the underlying DES block cipher itself.
The successful hybrid solution then. But you also mentioned even this necessary migration wasn't easy.
Oh no. rolling out triple DES across banking systems, government systems, everywhere DES was used. That was still a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar, complex logistical effort involving hardware changes, software updates, key management updates. It was a major undertaking, even for what seems like a relatively straightforward upgrade concept.
It really highlights the inertia in these large systems.
Absolutely.
But, okay, even if you have a robust algorithm like Triple DS or modern AES and you've managed the migration, the security can still be undermined, right, by how you use the algorithm, implementation choices again, or maybe the protocol around it.
Exactly. The mode of operation is critical. This takes us beyond the block cipher itself to how you apply it to sequences of data blocks. Yeah. Let's look at two common modes, cipher block chaining, CBC, and counter mode, CTR.
Okay, CBC mode first. What's its goal?
CBC's main goal is to hide patterns in the plaintext. If you just encrypted each block independently, that's called electronic codebook or ECB mode, and it's generally bad, then identical plaintext blocks would always produce identical ciphertext blocks.
Which would leak information, like seeing the same encrypted block pattern repeating in a message.
Right. So CBC avoids this. Before encrypting the current plaintext block, it XORs it with the ciphertext of the previous block. This chaining effect means that even if you have identical plaintext blocks, they will encrypt to different ciphertext blocks because the input to the encryption function is different each time.
That sounds good. But you mentioned there's still a potential vulnerability with CBC related to shared content.
Yes. While CBC ensures identical blocks encrypt differently within a message, think about two separate messages that happen to start the same way. Maybe they both begin with the same standard protocol header or the same command like getindex.html http 1.1.
Okay.
Because the encryption of each block depends only on the current plaintext block and the previous ciphertext block and an initial random value called the phi v for the very first block. If the first n blocks of plaintext are identical in two messages and they use the same key, then the first n blocks of ciphertext will also be identical up until the point where the plaintexts diverge.
Ah, I see. So if an attacker sees two encrypted messages starting with the exact same sequence of ciphertext blocks,
they immediately know that the underlying plaintext messages also started identically for that same length. They don't know what the plaintext is, but knowing that shared prefix can be very valuable in cryptanalysis, especially in understanding protocols or guessing parts of messages.
right. Okay, so how does counter mode CTR compare? You said it's often favored now.
CTR mode works quite differently. It essentially turns a block cipher like AES into a stream cipher.
How does it do that?
Instead of encrypting the plaintext directly, CTR mode encrypts a sequence of counter values. You start with a nonce, a number used once, and combine it with a counter, 0, 1, 2, 3. You encrypt nonce, 0, then nonce 1, then nonce 2, and so on, using the secret key.
Okay, so you get a stream of output blocks from the encryption.
Exactly. A pseudorandom stream of bits, let's call it S. Then to get the ciphertext C, you simply XOR this pseudorandom stream S with your plaintext P. So CPAS decryption is the same process. You generate the same stream S and XOR it with the ciphertext to recover the plaintext, P key AES.
Interesting. And you mentioned a critical difference regarding the starting value, the nonce in CTR versus the IV in CBC.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial. For CBC, the initial value needs to be unpredictable, essentially random, to prevent certain attacks. For CTR mode, the nonce does not need to be random or secret. It just needs to be unique for every message encrypted with the same key. It absolutely, positively must never be reused with the same key.
Okay, wait. Why is uniqueness the critical part here, not randomness? And what happens if you do reuse a nonce? You said it was catastrophic.
It's catastrophic because if you reuse the nonce with the same key, you will generate the exact same counter blocks, nonce 0, nonce 1, etc., which means you will encrypt them using the same key to produce the exact same pseudorandom stream S.
Ah, so you're using the same key stream S for two different messages.
Exactly. And that is the cardinal sin of stream ciphers. It's equivalent to reusing a one-time pad, which completely breaks the security.
Can you walk us through the math quickly? How does reusing S break it?
Sure. Let's say an attacker gets two ciphertexts, C1 and C2, that were created using the same key and the same reused nonce. So they know C1 is P1S, where P1 is the first plaintext. C2, P2 or S, where P2 is the second plaintext and S is the same stream.
Okay.
The attacker simply XORs the two ciphertexts together, C1, EC2. What happens when you XOR those equations?
Well, P1S, P2RS. XOR is associative and commutative, and XORing something with itself cancels it out, so the S terms disappear.
Precisely. S is 0, so the attacker's left with C1, C2 equals P1, P2.
They get the XOR sum of the two original plain texts.
Yes, they don't get P1 or P2 directly, but getting P1, P2 leaks a huge amount of information. If they know or can guess parts of P1, like standard headers, they can often deduce the corresponding parts of P2. It completely undermines the confidentiality. Nonce reuse in CTR mode is a fatal flaw.
Got it. Nonce must be unique. Okay, so moving towards the kind of schemes replacing older ones, we see more complex math coming into play. Elliptic Curve Cryptography, ECC, is a big one now.
Yeah, ECC has become incredibly widespread, especially in the last decade or so. The main advantage is efficiency.
How so?
ECC offers security strength comparable to older systems like RSA, but with much, much smaller key sizes. Like a 256-bit ECC key might offer similar security to a 32-bit RSA key.
And smaller keys mean?
Faster computations, less storage space, lower bandwidth usage, less power consumption. This makes ECC ideal for resource-constrained environments. Think smartphones, IoT devices, smart cards.
And specific schemes like ED2551N are mentioned.
Right. ED2551N is a specific implementation of ECC based on what's called a twisted Edwards curve, related to curve 2551N developed by Daniel Bernstein.
Yeah.
It's known for being particularly fast and also designed with features that make it harder to implement incorrectly, avoiding some common side-channel vulnerabilities. It's seen as a very strong modern standard for digital signatures and key exchange.
And it's recently become official in government standards, too.
Yes, that's a significant milestone. NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, officially included ED25-MIV13 signatures in their standard FIX 186-5, which was finalized in February 2023. That signals its maturity and widespread acceptance, and it further drives the need for migrating older infrastructure just for performance and modern security features alone.
Now, when we talk about the security of these modern schemes, or even older ones, the term proofs of security often comes up. But you hinted these aren't like mathematical proofs of absolute certainty.
That's a really important nuance to understand, yes. In cryptography, a security proof is usually a demonstration of relative security, meaning we don't prove this cipher is absolutely unbreakable. Instead, we prove something like breaking this cipher, say recovering the secret key, is computationally equivalent to solving a well-known, widely studied mathematical problem that is believed to be hard.
Like factoring large numbers for RSA or computing discrete logarithms for Diffie-Hellman or some ECC schemes?
Exactly. The proof establishes a reduction. If you could break our cipher easily, you could also use that method to easily solve this underlying hard problem. Since we have decades of evidence suggesting that problem is hard, we gain confidence in the cipher.
So it's like saying, look, if our cipher falls, a whole lot of other things everyone relies on are falling too. It connects its security to the broader mathematical foundation.
Precisely. It's a powerful tool for gaining assurance. However, and this is a crucial caveat, these proofs are usually specific to a particular security goal and a particular attack model.
What do you mean?
Well, a proof might show that recovering the secret key is as hard as factoring. But maybe there's another way to attack the system. Perhaps an attacker finds a flaw that lets them recover the plaintext directly without ever finding the secret key.
So they bypass the specific thing the proof was about.
Exactly. The proof about key recovery difficulty still holds, but it's irrelevant because the attacker found a different weakness. Or maybe the proof assumes idealized computation, but a real-world implementation leaks information through timing differences or power consumption side-channel attacks.
So proofs are valuable. They give us confidence based on hard math problems, but they're not a magic shield against all possible attacks, especially implementation flaws or attacks outside the model.
That's a perfect summary. They are essential tools for cryptographic design and analysis, but they don't guarantee real-world security on their own. You still need careful implementation, protocol design, and system-level thinking.
Okay, so we've dug into the building blocks. The keys are fragile. The algorithms need replacing eventually. Even the modes of operation matter hugely. Now let's zoom out. Let's talk about the sheer engineering nightmare of actually managing these changes across the massive interconnected systems we rely on.
Right. This is where the theory hits the often brutal reality.
Yeah.
We have to confront the scale of what the sources call a system of systems.
And the smart grid is used as a prime example.
It's a perfect one. The IE 2030 standard describes it as this incredibly complex web, intertwining three distinct domains: the physical power systems, generation, transmission, distribution. the communication technologies connecting everything, and the information systems used for control and management.
And the diversity must be huge. Different vendors, different protocols, devices, decades old, alongside brand new ones.
Staggering complexity. And securing it is exponentially harder than securing, say, a traditional corporate IT network, partly because that old idea of a strong perimeter doesn't really apply in the same way.
How so?
Well, the sources point out that communication between devices out in the field, maybe within a substation or neighborhood network, is often based on a degree of implicit trust. The real vulnerability hotspot tends to be the connections back to the central control and management systems.
The back office systems. You mentioned SCADA.
Yes, SCADA's supervisory control and data acquisition systems. These are the brains. They monitor and control the critical infrastructure, the turbines, the switches, the transformers.
So compromising SCADA is the nightmare scenario for the grid.
Absolutely. And the problem is, these highly sensitive SCADA servers and management stations are often connected, sometimes physically located in the same data centers, as regular corporate IT systems. They connect to almost every operational service distribution management, outage reporting, billing.
So a breach in a less critical part of the IT network could potentially pathway into the core grid controls.
If the logical separation, the access controls, the network segmentation aren't incredibly strong and rigorously enforced, then yes, an attacker who compromises, say, a billing server or even a field device with weak security might be able to move laterally and eventually reach the crown jewels, the SCADA systems. It makes securing that interface absolutely critical.
And this whole picture, the complexity, the interconnections, the legacy components, it really drives home that core difficulty quoted in the material. Security and reliability just can't easily be retrofitted into software or systems.
No, they really can't. You have to think about them, account for them, design for them right from the earliest phases.
Try and attack on security features later.
The source calls it painful and less effective. And, I'd add, incredibly expensive. If a system was designed assuming, say, DES was good enough forever, and the cryptographic functions are hard-coded deep in firmware on thousands of devices that are hard to physically access.
Then migrating to AES or something newer isn't just a software update.
No, you might be looking at physically replacing hardware across the entire grid. The cost, the logistics, the downtime, it becomes astronomical. Designing for crypto agility from the start, maybe using cryptographic libraries that can be updated, having secure firmware update mechanisms, avoiding hard-coded parameters that's essential, but often wasn't done in older systems.
Which brings us right back to the people involved, the human and organizational barriers. Because even if you could design perfectly from scratch today, the process is still run by humans.
And humans make mistakes. It's unavoidable. The sources are quite blunt about this. Even the best trained engineers, even security experts who literally write security protocols, can still write insecure code or overlook critical reliability issues.
Why is it so hard?
It's just the sheer cognitive load. Trying to keep all the different complex considerations in your head at the same time, the specific algorithm choice, the correct mode of operation, secure key generation, avoiding side channels, robust key management, secure memory handling, network protocol interactions, potential downstream impacts. It's incredibly demanding. Something inevitably gets missed sometimes.
So this inherent human fallibility seems to demand a shift in culture, right? Moving away from relying solely on maybe undocumented expert intuition.
Yeah, that gut feeling about security.
Towards more measurable, quantitative approaches to security and risk.
Absolutely. The sources talk about needing a paradigm shift here, but it involves overcoming a lot of cultural inertia. Engineers, managers, organizations often resist quantitative methods.
Why? You'd think metrics would be good.
Sometimes the excuse is, oh, security's too complex, we don't have perfect data, so we can't quantify it. But that's exactly backwards.
Right. If it's as complex as the smart grid or building a nuclear reactor or flying a plane, that's precisely why you need metrics, processes, and checks. You can't just intuit your way through that level of complexity.
Exactly. The human mind simply isn't capable of juggling all those variables accurately. Quantitative methods, even if the models aren't perfect, force you to be explicit about your assumptions, to measure what you can, to track progress. They make security more of a rigorous engineering discipline and less of an art form. And that's fundamental if you want to achieve agility, because you need to quantify the risk of not migrating to justify the often huge cost of migrating.
Okay, so if the systems are super complex and humans are prone to error under that complexity, we need systems or processes to help manage that human element. Which leads, maybe surprisingly, to the idea of checklists.
Yeah, it sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? But the sources highlight the incredible utility of simple, well-designed checklists in fields that manage extreme complexity and high-stakes surgery aviation.
Right, the pre-flight checklist, the surgical safety checklist.
Right. They aren't there because pilots or surgeons are unskilled. They're there precisely because these are highly skilled people working in incredibly complex, often high-pressure, distraction-filled environments. The checklist acts as a cognitive safety net, ensuring critical known steps aren't accidentally overlooked in the heat of the moment.
So how does this apply to something like a complex crypto migration across a huge IT system?
The sources specifically mention the value of a DIA-confirmed checklist format. You might perform a whole series of complex actions, maybe updating firmware on hundreds of servers, configuring new firewall rules, deploying new keys, a flurry of activity.
Okay.
Then you reach a predefined critical juncture and you stop. And you use the checklist to explicitly confirm that all the necessary preceding steps were actually completed correctly before moving on. Did the key rotation script run successfully on the master server? Yes, check. Was a backup taken before the update? Yes, check. Has the old key material been scheduled for secure destruction? Yes, check.
It enforces a pause and verification at crucial points.
Exactly. It's organizational rigor, stepping in to prevent a systemic failure that could easily result from one highly capable but momentarily distracted or overloaded engineer missing one vital step in a long, complex sequence.
Makes sense. But the organization's own engineers aren't the only human factor, right? We live in a world of interconnected systems, outsourced services, the supply chain.
Oh, absolutely. Vendor and supply chain risk is a massive piece of the crypto agility puzzle today. You can have the most agile processes internally, but if you rely on third-party software or services that aren't agile.
You're stuck waiting for them, or you inherit their vulnerabilities.
Precisely. With so much IT outsourced, so many software projects built on layers upon layers of third-party libraries and dependencies, and heavy reliance on cloud providers, vendor risk management isn't just a nice-to-have anymore. It's imperative.
So what does that entail practically?
It means organizations, especially larger ones or those handling sensitive data, need dedicated, continuous effort just monitoring their entire dependency landscape. Every library, every external API, every SaaS provider, every piece of hardware from a third party. You need to know what you're using, and you need processes to track vulnerability disclosures related to those components.
And be ready to patch quickly when something emerges.
Instantly, if possible. Your ability to migrate or patch might be entirely dependent on your vendor releasing an update. So you need visibility into your vendor's security practices, their patching cadence, their own crypto agility plans. The supply chain has become a primary attack vector, and securing it is integral to your own resilience and agility.
Let's shift focus slightly now towards how some of the biggest players, state-level organizations dealing with digital conflict daily, think about risk and allocate resources. What can we learn from them about prioritizing security?
Well, that's a telling observation in the source material regarding how resources sometimes get split within intelligence agencies, using the NSA as a contextual example.
Okay.
It notes a documented disparity where the budget allocated for offensive capabilities, things like finding vulnerabilities, developing exploits, breaking into foreign systems, can sometimes be significantly larger, maybe even double, the budget allocated to defending their own government networks.
Wow. So if, hypothetically, the offensive breaking and entering budget was, say, $652 million, and the budget to secure their own networks was half that, that signals a pretty clear priority, doesn't it?
It certainly suggests a strong policy emphasis on intelligence gathering and projecting power in cyberspace, perhaps sometimes seen as overshadowing the maybe less glamorous mission of meticulously hardening one's own infrastructure.
And this tension, this prioritization, it had real-world consequences that became very public, didn't it, with the whole VEP process?
Exactly. The Vulnerabilities Equities Process, or VEP. This was the internal U.S. government process designed to decide the fate of newly discovered zero-day vulnerabilities flaws unknown to the software vendor.
The decision being, do we tell the vendor so they can fix it for everyone, protecting U.S. systems and the internet at large, or do we keep it secret to use for our own intelligence gathering or offensive operations?
Right, and the justification for keeping secrets often relied on this controversial logic called no be use.
Nobody but us?
Yeah. The theory, or perhaps hope, was that if a vulnerability was incredibly complex, deeply hidden, really hard to find, then presumably nobody but us, the highly sophisticated U.S. agency, could discover or exploit it. Therefore, it was relatively safe to keep secret in use.
But that theory spectacularly collided with reality.
It did, most notably with the series of leaks from the group calling itself the Shadow Brokers, starting around 2016. They released a huge trove of sophisticated exploits and tools allegedly belonging to the NSA.
And what did analyzing those leaked exploits reveal about the no-BOS logic and the VEP?
It revealed that many of the vulnerabilities being hoarded under the no-BOS justification weren't actually that exotic or impossible to find. They were flaws in widely used software, Microsoft Windows, firewalls, routers that other capable adversaries, whether nation-states or even cybercriminals, could and eventually did find independently.
So the nobody but us assumption was often wrong. These were vulnerabilities affecting potentially millions of regular users, businesses, and even other U.S. government systems.
Correct. The VEP process, influenced perhaps by the offensive mission's priorities, had failed to ensure these discoverable vulnerabilities were disclosed and fixed in a timely manner. Holding on to them actually increased the risk to U.S. infrastructure and the global internet, as demonstrated when some of those leaked exploits were later repurposed in major ransomware attacks like WannaCry and NotPetya.
So if the VEP had leaned more towards disclosure, towards fixing the holes, overall security would have been higher.
Arguably, yes. It's a stark lesson in how organizational priorities and processes, like the VEP, can directly impact real-world security outcomes. And it brings us back to the core message for any organization planning for future crypto transitions or just managing security day-to-day.
Which is?
That security can't be an afterthought, and it can't be solely reactive. It has to be baked into the entire life cycle, starting with development, and driven by an ongoing assessment of actual risk.
And part of that risk assessment means prioritizing what needs the strongest protection, especially looking ahead.
Exactly. The sources stress this. Sensitive data that needs to remain confidential for a very long time. Think classified government documents, long-term corporate strategies, personal health records, cryptographic keys themselves. The data must be prioritized for the highest levels of protection.
And that means ensuring the cryptographic systems guarding it are not only strong now, but also agile, ready for the next migration.
Yes. The key management systems, the algorithms used, the protocols they need to be robust, yes, but also designed for replaceability. This continuous cycle of risk assessment feeding into development, deployment, and planned obsolescence is the only sustainable path to resilience.
Okay, so tying this all together, this inherent difficulty in managing keys, replacing legacy algorithms, overcoming organizational inertia, it all points towards the monumental task of the next cryptographic modernization, whatever the ultimate trigger might be: quantum computers, new mathematical breaks, or just performance needs.
It really does. We just spent time talking about the migration from DES to triple DS. Remember, DS wasn't fundamentally broken in its math. It just needed a longer key. Seems like a relatively contained problem.
Right. Address the key length.
Yet even that simple upgrade proved to be this complex, multi-decade, logistically challenging struggle across industries, resulting in this layered hybrid solution, triple DES, as a bridge until AES was fully ready and deployed. The engineering effort, the coordination, the cost was immense.
So, if that was so hard, upgrading the key length of one widely used symmetric cipher, what does that tell us about the scale of the effort needed for true system-wide crypto agility, especially if we ever face a threat that requires replacing essentially all of our current public key infrastructure?
We're talking about an effort that dwarfs the DS to 3D migration by orders of magnitude. Think about replacing every TLS certificate on the internet, every digital signature scheme, every piece of firmware and critical infrastructure like the smart grid that relies on RSA or ECC, every embedded system in cars or medical devices, every secure messaging app.
Everything built over the last, 30, 40 years using current public key standards?
Exactly. The challenge isn't just finding the new, better algorithms. Cryptographers are already working hard on post-quantum candidates and other improvements. We have brilliant new math. The truly monumental challenge lies in the organizational hurdles, the human factors, the supply chain complexities, and the sheer engineering task of deploying these changes across trillions of interconnected, often legacy, systems. Mastering the fundamentals, we talked about key integrity, secure implementation, designing for adaptability from the start, that's the foundation. But the actual migration, that logistical effort, is the real mountain we need to be prepared to climb.
That really puts it in perspective. It's a powerful and, frankly, pretty sobering thought. The flashy theoretical threats might get the headlines, but the systemic grinding inability to properly manage your keys today or to swap out a component that you know is aging, That might be the thing that actually dictates the security or the failure of our increasingly digital world.
It really might be. The history of DES and triple DS, the complexities of key destruction, the failures in implementation like Norton Discrete, they all teach us a crucial lesson. Maybe we spend a bit too much time worrying about the adversary's cleverness
And not enough time focusing on.
and not nearly enough time focusing on the quality, the robustness, the maintainability, and the fundamental agility of our own systems and processes. Getting our own house in order might be the best defense we have.
That's a fantastic point to end on. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that today. Really insightful.
My pleasure. It was a great discussion.
And thank you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some food for thought about the difference between those theoretical security models and the, well, often messy, practical reality of security engineering and organizational change. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, stay curious.